Oregon's offense has got a lot of weapons in 2024. Just how good can it be? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show. Thrilled to bring back Jared Mack. You know him from 24/7 Sports, the Autzen Audibles podcast. He's been on a couple times before. We will definitely talk baseball later in the show, but we start with football, Jared. Let's just hop right into it. Every metric that you look at is not just high on Oregon's team, but the offense specifically, even more so than the defense. If you look at metrics like S&P Plus, for instance, they got Oregon closer to the top 3 in the country, defense kind of top 15-ish. I think this is the best offense in the Big Ten on paper. Do you agree? And where do you think they stand in compared to the rest of the college football world?
I agree. Let's just start there in the Big Ten. I think really the only other contender is Ohio State. And while Ohio State has great weapons on the outside, like Emeka Egbuka, and they've got 2 great running backs in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, the Ole Miss transfer, I think that the ultimate difference maker between Ohio State and Oregon is going to be the quarterback play. And at this point, I would take Dillon Gabriel over Will Howard. And that's not to say that Will Howard isn't a good quarterback, but I think that Dillon Gabriel's just better. I think it's just kind of as simple as that. And, I'm very interested to see what that Ohio State offense will look like under Chip Kelly in his first year there as an offensive coordinator. I'm not exactly sure that Will Howard is the quarterback to kind of command a Chip Kelly offense. He's not when you think of a Chip Kelly offense, you think of, the good years at UCLA with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, kind of like a thinner guy who can run around. Obviously, you look back at, Marcus Mariota or Darren Thomas, something like that, where there's thinner guys who can run, who can also make a couple throws. I think that Will Howard is I know that Will Howard is a bigger boy, and he can get around, and he's kind of more of like a Josh Allen prototype of a quarterback runner rather than a Mariota or somebody else that Chip Kelly has had. So first, I think that'll be really interesting. But, overall, I think Oregon's offense is just going to be maybe not leaps and bounds better, but it's going to be a better offense. I think they have more weapons on the outside, especially with Tez and Evan Stewart. Their tight end room is pretty stacked. I think Terrence Ferguson is your very good prototypical tight end, but Kenyon Sadiq is a guy who could just be used all over. And I think he could be the Swiss Army knife, kind of the key factor in how well Oregon's offense does. And then, Jordan James, Noah Winning. I'm so used to saying those two guys back to back.
It's been a long time. It's been a long time since someone not named Bucky Irving's been in Oregon's backfield.
Yeah, and those guys have always gone hand in hand together. But it's going to be Jordan James and Noah Winnington this year. And then, Jay Harris is that third string running back. I think it's a really good running back room. And I think overall, and then, not to mention the offensive line where they return to Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly as the tackles. I think it's just a better offense. I think they're both going to be great, but I'll take Oregon.
I will as well. And I like that you brought up the quarterback factor because I too am a Will Howard fan. I think his best season is likely to occur this year if he stays healthy at Ohio State and everything that they've got. But if you'd asked me during the offseason, would I rather have Dillon Gabriel or Will Howard, I would have said Dillon Gabriel. And I think Gabriel has showcased a lot. And I think he's probably closer to his ceiling than Will Howard is, but his production is also vastly superior to what Howard has put on paper so far in his career. And the next best offense you'd maybe look at in the Big Ten is probably USC's. Quite frankly, I think I would put USC there before I put Penn State. Now, Penn State brought in a new offensive coordinator. Drew Aller is back at quarterback. I like the offseason that James Franklin and company have had, but I too would lean Oregon there. I think the only offensive position group I can definitively say Ohio State would be better in the Big Ten is running back, and I love Oregon's running back room. But Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins are just those are big time backs, probably the best backfield in all of college football. But Oregon certainly has had years where their offense is top 5 in the entire country. Last year they led the Pac-12 in yards per game at over 500 per and scoring at 44 points per game. Do you think they can replicate those sorts of numbers because I think Gabriel's really good. I don't think he's quite what Bo Nix was a year ago, which was probably the best or second best season in Oregon quarterback history in terms of the numbers that he put up. And I think the offensive line will be very good. I don't know if you can lose a guy like JPJ and be just as good when you got a true sophomore probably starting at center. So do you think there could be any regression on the offensive side of the ball, even though if it were to happen, I would think it might be pretty slight?
Yeah, so the thing is, it's like it's due for regression. Like they had one of the best offensive seasons like in NCAA history, and that could be because of the defenses that they played last year in the Pac-12. There weren't a lot of really strong ones. That could be just because of how well Bo Nix was as a field manager and the weapons that he had around him, the offensive line that's going to produce a couple guys who are going to be in the NFL at one point. It's just it would be. I don't want to say it would be kind of fantasy for me to admit that it's like, oh no, they'll just get better. It's like, it's going to be really hard to get better. Granted, I kind of thought that same way after Kenny Dillingham left, where it's like, man, they were really damn good compared to what it had been under the Mario Cristobal era. Like, can they get better? Like better is like a top 5 team in the country in terms of offensive totals. And they did exactly that. So I don't think it's going to be as good as it was last season, and that's not to say they won't be good. I think that they will run into stiffer competition. I think that, at least on paper right now, I think Bo Nix is a better college quarterback in his development at Oregon than Dillon Gabriel is, but that he could absolutely prove me wrong. I think as of right now, on June 13th, I think I feel fine saying that, but it wouldn't shock me if they do just the same, or just maybe even marginally better. I feel like they've maybe improved or at least kept the same level of talent and standard at a majority of the positions, maybe just only outside of center. Like wide receiver, you bring back Tez, you have another development year of Gary Bryant and Trayshawn Holden, and then Jurion Dickey, and then, you bring in Evan Stewart. So I would take this year's wide receiver room over last year's. Tight end is the same thing. Offensive line is the same thing other than JPJ, like you mentioned. And then running back, you're just losing Bucky Irving, but there's been a lot of people who think that Jordan James is just better than Bucky Irving. And while I won't go that far because I haven't seen Jordan James take the full workload like I have Bucky Irving the last 2 seasons, but I know that Jordan James is pretty darn good. So I think it's due for a regression just because, it's hard to be as good as they were last year. It's just kind of simple as that. But they got the guys to put together another really good season, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's like if Scotty Scheffler goes into 2025, he's probably going to have a little bit of a regression year compared to what he's putting together right now. Yeah. I don't know how closely you follow golf, but no, 100%. He's won 5 times in his last 8 starts. He's got 2 more chances to win a major championship. He's probably going to be in contention this weekend. Like if next year he doesn't win a major, but he wins 4 times, like that's still an outstanding season. It just wouldn't be the year that he's having this year. Like you talk about Oregon's numbers, 530 yards a game, 44 points per. That might come down to like 39 points a game and 480 yards per. And that's good enough to win the Big Ten and get to the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I don't think that they need to put up those same types of numbers to win. Like, again, last year in the Pac-12, you were going against NFL quarterbacks every other week.
You are not doing that in the Big Ten.
You're not, and especially this year. Like, you mentioned Drew Aller at Penn State. Like, I don't know how good Drew Aller is. And Penn State's offense wasn't that great last year because of what a question mark Drew Aller was at the quarterback position. Like Will Howard, I'm not, I don't know. Granted, I don't know if Dillon Gabriel is an NFL guy, but I don't know if Will Howard is an NFL guy. But last year, you're going against Penix, Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders is going to be a first-round pick. Like, these are real dudes that you have to go against and you have to score against. And, obviously some of those games, especially Colorado, like they didn't need to score more than 10 points to win that one. But regardless, like I don't think they're going to need to put up 40 plus points a game to win the conference if they are going to win the conference. I think they're going to be a good offense no matter what, and they'll just go against better defenses than they did in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and as long as the defense makes the steps, and I don't think they have to take a big step forward defensively either, because there is no. The only thing that got in Oregon's way last year was Washington, and there is nothing even close to Washington in the league this year, and that includes USC, who's not even on Oregon's schedule. We still have plenty more to get to, including Jared's thoughts on a handful of pop candidates, guys that were on the team last year that will have a bigger season or a role this year. That's coming up next. This episode is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Jared, I'm going to hit you with 3 names or predictions that have come in either from my own head or the heads of listeners or watchers of Locked On Ducks out there, and we shall get your thoughts. I have not told him these ahead of time because that's the most fun way to do podcasting. Always. Get the live reaction here. Let's start with this one on the defensive side of the ball. Tatum Tuioti accounts for 10 or more combined sacks and TFLs, and I am separating those two stats in a way that the NCAA does not, for reasons that I cannot and will never understand. So, for example, 4.5 sacks and 5.5 TFLs would amount to 10 total. That would be written differently in the stat books, but I think you get what I'm going for here. How likely or possible do you think that is?
Well, I think it's just going to depend on how much the guy plays. And I'm not saying that he will not be a factor in this defense. I certainly think he will. He got 2 sacks last season, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he would need to at least double that production and then add in a bunch of tackles for loss. But I can see it happening. I'm not sure if it's likely or unlikely. I think it's a good line. Like if, guessing the odds type of deal. It's like, do you go over or under on that number? I think it's a good one because I think with the loss of Mace Funa to graduation this year, Oregon needs somebody on that outside, that jack linebacker position, the Sam linebacker position, to go and be able to work in the run game. And for as good as Mateo Uiagalelei is, or at least I think he can be, I'm not sure that he's the run guy out there. And I think that Tatum Tuioti could step into that role. And I feel the same about Mateo as I do with Blake Purchase, a guy who I think is better suited to rush the passer. So I think Tuioti is going to be that run guy, which will give him opportunities to make tackles for loss. And I know you want an answer here. So I'm going to give Oregon fans some hope and say that I think it's likely that he goes over 10. But it's going to take a big season from him to do so. But I think that he really opened a lot of people's eyes last year, especially from my perspective, where he comes in as a 4-star recruit. He's a coach's kid. Like how good is he? Like, is he going to do anything here? Or is he just here because his dad's a coach? It's like, no. He's really good. He's really, really, really good. And he's going to go and play from day one if he wasn't hurt, like in the first week of the season. So I think he could be a starting Sam Jack linebacker, just depending on the matchup too. So I think he'll get plenty of reps to do so. And I'll say that he does it.
I remember watching him run down the field covering T-Ferg in the spring game and just trying to make sure that my eyes weren't deceiving me. Like that's defensive end, and he is running down the field stride for stride in good coverage with Oregon's NFL-capable tight end. I went towards the under with this, Jared, not because he isn't capable, but because I think that edge spot is so stacked because you've got Mateo in Purchase. Don't ever forget about Amarion Winston. He is just a very good, solid football player in there. We'll see if Elijah Rushing contributes as a true freshman. I think your first point is kind of where my mind led me to lean towards the under. I think his production takes a step forward, right? No Mace Funa. You don't have Dorless taking sacks away. The other thing, too, I'm excited to see what this coaching staff does with the pass rushing packages for this defense, because when you have, a 3rd and 9 situation, do you have Jordan Birch as the only guy on the interior with his hand in the ground, or stand up everybody and put all 3 of those edge guys on the field alongside him, or do you put an extra linebacker out there? I think there are a lot of fun, creative ways that they can handle the defensive line there. Did you have any final thoughts on that?
I do like that exercise of trying to think what the pass rush situation would be like on a 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12, and just who the guys are out there. Um, there's a lot of options, just
Yeah.
like there was last year. I think that's going to be fun to see when that happens for the first time.
Yeah. I remember in the Colorado game, Purchase and Tuioti beat the Colorado tackles and converged on Shedeur Sanders for a sack. And I just kind of watched it going, well, first of all, love seeing sacks because in 2022, that wasn't a thing that Oregon really had.
No, it
but,
was not.
But
Yeah.
secondly, those two guys making that play, I was like, are we going to be watching those two do it for the next 3 seasons, including that one and maybe their senior years if they play like that? That group, I think, is really, really talented. Next prediction here. This is, again, a tricky one. Jordan James runs for 1,000 yards.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think like he was 700 plus yards last year and was like 7 yards a carry. And obviously that was against Pac-12 defenses who weren't that great and you could run a lot on. You know, you look at games like Arizona State, you look at games like Colorado, like that was kind of some bloodshedding. And I don't think that there's as many teams on the schedule this year that you're going to be able to get those huge chunk plays. But I think Jordan James is more than capable. Last 2 years under Dan Lanning and his offensive coordinators, they've just had a 2 or 3 running back set. And really it's 3. And Jordan James has been that 3rd guy until Noah Whittington got hurt. And it's just like, James's freshman year, he was just a 3rd down dude, 3rd down goal line situation, like big kind of bruiser back. I think that he's more than capable of being the true number 1 and running for over 1,000 yards. I think there's part of me that thinks that he's just naturally better than Bucky Irving. I don't want to say that because I think Bucky Irving was really, really, really good. And
they're different. I think it's fair to say that they are different types of runner. 100%. I don't think anyone runs like Bucky. Like I compared him somewhat to LaMichael with his lateral movement, but even stylistically, they were not the same.
No, and they're everybody's kind of different in that room, especially this year. But there's something about the way Jordan runs that reminds me more of like just a better running back. I don't know what it is, but I think that he's more than capable of running over 1,000 yards. I think if Bucky was able to do it, especially last year where he's kind of hurt down the stretch of the season, I think that Jordan can do it. The only problem is just like, will Oregon's offensive line, especially the interior that we kind of mentioned with JPJ being gone, will they be as good against bigger Big Ten lines? And that's just a question that's going to be answered next season. Like I can't say that they will because I don't know. They might be as good as they were last year as an offensive line unit, or they might kind of stink. I don't know. This is why you play the game. So I think he'll do it just because I have confidence in that group and I think they're talented, but you just have to play the games. And I don't think it'll be as easy as it was last year. So if it is 1,000 yards, it's going to be a very hard-earned 1,000 yards.
I agree that it'll be very hard-earned in the Big Ten, and also, again, from just a touches and snaps standpoint, because Noah Whittington is no slouch. I know Oregon fans might have forgotten because he got hurt last year and missed a big chunk of the season, but that guy's really good. The other day I was watching again the Colorado highlights on YouTube because that was just kind of a fun day, and that's what I do in my free time when I'm not golfing, of course. And Noah Whittington in that game looks awesome. Or in the Texas Tech, he looks fantastic, and that's because he's a really, really good back. And I think those guys form an outstanding tandem. And I kind of thought coming in spring that Whittington might be closer to the number 1 guy than most people thought. And then I watched Jordan James in the spring game, and his first touch went for 35 yards, and he was just kind of sifting his way through the defense, and his acceleration and vision was just really, really good with his balance. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's probably your number 1 back. Last guy before we get to baseball a little bit later, Jared, Jurion Dickey. I don't have a specific prediction here, but I like you probably over on Autzen Audibles have gotten several questions or inquiries about like what is Dickey's role going to be. He's, I believe, other than Cameron Colvin, the highest rated Oregon receiver commit of all time. He is immensely talented, battled injuries last year that he suffered coming out of high school, so he never really got acclimated, but this receiver room is, in the eyes of some, the best in all of college football. I mean, does he crack 200 receiving yards this year?
It's going to be tough.
That's what I think too.
And, given Junior Adams' track record the last 2 seasons where he's really only played like 4 or 5 wide receivers, he's talked about it. He's like, no, we have more talent this year. Like, we're going to get guys out onto the field. Like, I'll believe it when I see it type of deal. So, and if he doesn't, expand his wide receiver room from 4 or 5 guys to 7 or 8 dudes, then Jurion's maybe not going to see the field that often. I think that Jurion has as much like God-given talent as a lot of people in that receiving room. And he's just, like you said, he was hurt last year. So people were kind of like, oh, where is he? Why isn't he doing anything? It's like, well, he's rehabbing from an injury he suffered in high school. And then you see him or hear about him during the Fiesta Bowl. I asked everybody on the team that I could, like, who's a guy who, with an opening ahead of him, like who's a guy who could kind of show up and get the people talking and do well in this game. And everybody basically said Jurion Dickey. And a lot of hype, a lot of flash, a lot of substance there. Didn't do a lot of the spring game. I think he kind of got banged up there. So it's really tough for me to say what he'll do because I just haven't seen it. Everybody has talked very highly of the kid. He's a good guy. He works hard. He's in the room studying the film. He's trying to learn routes, all that stuff. And then he's just a naturally God-given athlete at that position. But I don't know what he's going to do this year. And with the guys in front of him, maybe he does nothing. Or maybe he's better than those guys. Maybe his 5-star status as a recruit was justified. And he comes in here and he gets healthy and he learns the playbook and is suddenly, Oregon's number 3 or number 4 behind Gary Bryant or Trayshawn Holden. Like, take your pick there. I just don't know. I would hope that he goes over 200 yards. But, if Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson are cooking, I'm not sure who else is getting the football.
Yeah, I mean, last year Oregon had 2,000-yard receivers, and the guys after that, Trayshawn Holden didn't even hit 500. I don't think. I think he was like 470 or so, and Gary Bryant Jr. was in the 400-yard range. And I think of those 4, Gary Bryant would be the guy whose role is the most up for grabs. But that doesn't mean that I feel like it's completely open and that he's got a battle to keep his number 4 receiver spot. I think the best way. Think about this. I think the best way Jurion Dickey could see the field more this fall is if Will Stein and Junior Adams decide when Oregon goes empty, they want 4 receivers on the field instead of 3. Or if they want to put 5 wideouts on the field at a time. Because in the last couple of years, when you look at what Oregon has done when they go to the empty sets, which they've done a lot of, and it's been a great formation for them. Typically, they have a tight end and a running back on the field, and the running back splits out wide and usually just runs a little hitch, and T. Ferg's running an option route from that slot position, and then you've got 3 receivers there.
Yep.
I wonder if in the last couple of years they didn't feel like they could put 5 wideouts on the field at the same time, but with this group, with Jurion Dickey and Kyler Casper now having 3 combined off seasons between them to have, learn the playbook and understand the offense and get acclimated to college football. I wonder if that isn't, something that could change for Will Stein and the offense where they look and go, okay, we can put more receivers on the field. We don't have to have a running back out there. And obviously your wideouts are going to be better pass catchers.
Yeah, I think that's certainly an option. I think another reason, I certainly think what you said is true where maybe they didn't feel like they could put 4 or 5 guys out there because they didn't think that they had 4 or 5 guys out there, especially if they tried to go 5 wide. Like last year, I don't know who would have been that 5th receiver. It would have been
probably Kyler Casper if Jurion Dickey was hurt, and Casper was supposed to be a 2023 recruit. So what was his body in that sort of shape? Maybe he had one off season.
Maybe, but I think it's just kind of a coin flip. Like you throw Justice Lowe in there too, or Chris Hudson when he was on the team. Like there's I'm not sure who it would have been in that 5th receiver. And the other thing was Bucky was a phenomenal pass catcher, which Jordan James hasn't really shown that he's that good of a pass catcher. He looked really good in the spring game. I think he led the team in receptions out of the backfield in the spring game, which was
he had 5. I think he had 5 catches.
Which was a very encouraging sign if you're Oregon, where you need that, because that was, again, a really big part of their offense last year was, Bo Nix getting in pressure, but then just dumping it off to Bucky and him going out and making 8 to 10 yards at a time. That was a huge part of their offense last year. So you want to see that from Jordan. But If Jordan can't do that, I do think that now you have the depth to go out there and throw four wide receivers and Terrence Ferguson out there in a 5 wide set if you so desire. Or, like you mentioned, all 5 of them being wide receivers. I like the idea of having a big target in Ferguson, but maybe it's Kenyon Sadiq, who is just a better athlete and a
like
pretty
that.
big target in his own right as a 6'3", 6'4" tight end, even though he's as fast and as physical as any wide receiver on the field. So I do think that they have more options this year. And whether that option is Jurion Dickey, I think we're just going to have to find out.
Yeah, I'm a big Kenyon Sadiq fan. I think he definitely has a bigger, more impactful year than he did a season ago. I think he could be the number 2 tight end by the end of the year. Not that Patrick Herbert isn't good or capable. We've seen that he is. I think Sadiq is just a much more explosive athlete. And I think there are a lot of weapons, as we talked about earlier in the show, on this Oregon offense. Last but certainly not least, Jared, let's talk Oregon baseball here. You were there in College Station, braving the heat, as was anyone else who was covering the game. I know that Joey Mack and Ryan Milano on the radio call, I was tuned in for a while, and they were talking about ice cream, I think to subconsciously cool them down at one point, because it was not a cold environment. It was not what Oregon was planning for. And my take was, the 7th inning is bad. Why don't we just say bad and leave it there, and say that that's a little bit of an understatement. But it was a horrible ending to what was a really great year. Like I thought this Oregon team would be good. I frankly didn't expect them to get back to a super regional because their lineup lost so much. It felt like it was a transition year. But you called it on this show a long time ago that their pitching was much, much better. And I know they struggled against Texas A&M, and that lineup was really, really good. And the pitching has another step they can take. But this team was kind of pitching oriented, and I likened it to Dana Altman teams going from, scoring 63 points a game and holding their opponents to 58 to all of a sudden, you know what, we don't have the personnel to do that. We're going to score 85 points a game and allow 78 the following season. So I thought it was a great season. It just had a really, really bad ending. Start with that. What were you thinking sitting in that press box watching the 7th inning?
Yeah, it was a tough watch. Obviously the consensus was you have to take more out. And while I agree, I think at one point, more should have been gone before he was actually gone. It's hard to kind of describe the levels of non-arms that Oregon had in the bullpen. Like, it was basically a ride or die with Brock Moore in that situation, and he just could not find the strike zone. Like, you used up Logan Mercado in game 1, you used up Ryan Featherston in game 1. You don't really have the depth that you once had during the middle of the year after a guy like Michael Friend had Tommy John surgery, after Toby Twisk went down with an injury. You really weren't sure what Jackson Jordan was because he was out for a while with an injury and only had a couple innings pitched since then. And you're really at that point just hoping that Brock Moore could figure it out and get it. And he just never did. I think it's kind of as simple as that. And Moore, was in the press conference afterward and talked about it and apologized to his teammates for just not figuring it out. He was clearly crying beforehand because this is his last year of college baseball. And, I give him a lot of credit for going out there and admitting, like, he was like, my front side was flying open and I couldn't control the ball and I just really struggled and I couldn't fix it. He knew exactly what was wrong and he just couldn't fix it. So if you're Wadzikowski, 2020 or hindsight is always 2020. You're going to say, I should have taken him out. But look what happened when Jackson Jordan went in. Like, that was your best option in the bullpen left. And he gave up he walked a guy, another run in, and then gave up a grand slam and then didn't even get out of the inning. So it's tough. It wasn't ideal. And a similar-ish thing happened last year in the Super Regionals where they just ran out of arms. I
remember that game 3 against Oral Roberts. Going into it, we weren't really sure who was going to start the game, and you just kind of got the sense that game 2 was Oregon's chance. They had the big comeback in game 1, and then they were a couple outs away in game 2, couldn't quite close the door, and then game 3 you knew. Unfortunately, the pitching staff had injuries again, and they were just out of pitching.
Yeah, and the problem with games 1 and 2 here against Texas A&M is the starters didn't go deep. RJ Gordon goes 3 1/3. Grayson Grinsell goes 4. Like that doesn't help your bullpen, especially a day after a 3 1/3 appearance where Logan Mercado has to eat innings at the end. And yeah, you can look hindsight and be like, well, Mercado should have only pitched 2 innings and then maybe gotten you guys or gotten somebody else in the game. And it's like, well, yeah, but he kept that game close. I know they ended up losing was 10-6 or whatever it was in the first game, but he kept it close. I think he only allowed 2 runs his entire 4 innings pitched. So he was lights out, and Texas A&M's pitching was lights out too. So I think a lot of this is kind of hindsight and reflection, but I think it just comes down to the amount of arms that were left in the bullpen that were really actually serviceable against the Texas A&M lineup. And there was just one, and it was Brock Moore, and he just couldn't figure it out. And at that point, it was just much too late. And it certainly stinks that this season, like you mentioned, and what I agree with, it was a really good year. I think it was a transition year, a retooling year where they won 40 games for just the 6th time since the program came back in 2009. I think it was a very good year, and it just kind of stinks for head coach Mark Wasikowski and the program that they had this debacle on national television, and that anybody who is an Oregon fan who is like, it's a June 9th, there's nothing else to do. Let's see how our team, the Oregon Ducks, goes and plays baseball against Texas A&M, a big team. And then that happens. And then that's kind of the perpetual image that's going to be stuck in their head until next February when the season starts over again. It doesn't help. And I think that was the biggest problem, at least when, dealing with people on message boards or social media. It's like, no, I have a 60-game sample size in my back pocket that tells me this team is good.
Yeah.
And I also have a 60-game sample size to tell me that Texas A&M.
Very good. Yeah, no, very, very good team. And, I said going into the series that Oregon's bats were going to have to be better than they were in the regional. And they were. Like, they hit the ball much better. And I felt they were going to need that because you're not going to have an ERA of, 4.25 as an entire pitching staff in the regional against San Diego and Santa Barbara twice. Like, that's just not going to hold up. But
right.
It was a negative end to, we'll end the week on some optimism here, Jared. Going into the Big Ten, I think Oregon baseball, like it seems like every other sport, even with the N'Faly Dante news, his waiver was denied. I'll talk about that more next week, and he won't be back for Oregon basketball. They're still one of the favorites in the Big Ten. Oregon football is still the number 2 favorite. Women's basketball is retooling. Baseball is going to be one of those teams that, again, is pushing for a conference championship and a regional berth because you look up and down this lineup and there's a lot of youth. I mean, Maddox Maloney was one of the key players on the team this year. He's a true freshman. He's a true freshman. You just have a lot of guys that'll be back. Certainly not everyone. You'd love to see him add a lot of bullpen arms, but I think this program is in a really, really good place despite the poor ending.
100%. And I think it's been in a really good place for the last couple of seasons. Like you said, there's a lot of youth. Last year they lost 70% of their offensive production. They returned some guys out of the bullpen and the starting rotation, but there's everybody has the option to come back, more or less. The only guy who's really gone is Bryce Betcher and Justin Casella in the outfield. Jeffrey Hurd can come back. Mason DeVille has to come back. Jacob Walsh could come back. Drew Smith could come back. He's draft eligible as a sophomore, but I'm not sure his season was good enough for somebody to take a chance on him. Maybe in the later rounds, but we'll see. Maddox Maloney's a freshman. He's got to come back. Carter Garate's third baseman. He's got to come back. He's just a sophomore. And then you have Ansoneros, Bennett Thompson, and Chase Meggers, who I think they're all either sophomores or redshirt sophomores. So maybe one of them is draft eligible, but they all got to come back, at least on paper. So I think that's a huge positive. I think they'll need to add an impact batter too, especially with Jacob Walsh leaving the program record holder for home runs and single season and career. But it'll come down to the pitching. And while RJ Gordon has an option to return, he might not. And I wouldn't blame him. It's been 5 years in college.
I would take him back. I understand the 5 years in college side of it.
You take him back.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be flying up major league draft boards because he's got decent stuff, but he only sits in like low to mid 90s or so, and that's not like Brock Moore. I feel like is someone that's going to get drafted. Like you throw
Brock Moore's a draft pick.
Yeah. You throw control issues aside. Major league organizations look at a guy like that and say, I see someone who touches 98 to occasionally triple digits and throws a slider that has good movement. I will draft that guy and we'll coach him up. Like he's getting drafted. I don't think Gordon would be an automatic draft pick, maybe a late round flyer. But now that they've condensed the draft down a little bit, I don't see him as, you know, a no doubt pick. Let's put it that way. So it could come down to what he wants to do.
Yeah, and exactly. It'll come down to what he wants to do. And if he wants to return, obviously Oregon would have him back. But if he wants to leave, then all credit to him. He had a great career here at Oregon. But they have guys in the wings. They have some young guys who I think could step into the starting roles, but they really have to figure out a replacement for Mercado, Bradley Mullen, who didn't pitch in the regionals because he was hurt, and Brock Moore. I think those guys were so awesome this year for their back of their bullpen, where that's something that they just didn't have against or all of last season that they need to find again. So I think that's probably number one on their to-do board, but it wouldn't, I mean, Mark Wasikowski and Jack Martyr, the hitting coach, and Blake Hawksworth, the pitching coach, and Marcus Hinkle, one of the assistants, have always been tremendous recruiters, and they've recruited a lot of good talent to come to Oregon, which is honestly, it's hard to do considering the other programs that are on the West Coast. It's not just like football where it's UCLA and USC and Washington, where maybe that's a little bit easier to recruit. In baseball, it's UC Irvine, it's Santa Barbara, it's San Diego State, it's USC, it's UC, it's all of these teams up and down the West Coast where you got to compete. And I think Waz has done a very good job bringing kids to campus. So we'll see. Transfer portal is going to be huge. I'll have information on that going forward on 24/7. So we'll try to figure out who's leaving and who's coming in. But I think that they're set up in the right direction for the future, especially in the Big Ten.
The recruiting pitch goes like this: come play for Oregon, a classic Big Ten baseball power, as we all know.
As we all know.
Yes, absolutely. Jared Mack, 24/7 Sports, Autzen Audibles podcast. Jared, appreciate it as always.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Ducks.